Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today. And welcome to the Global South Economics room. Today, we're going to be speaking about organizing in the Global South, its implication, and also how movement building has been working in the Global South. So today, we have 4 amazing speakers from 4 different groups who are working on rethinking economics in their own contexts. And I'm going to introduce them briefly, and then I'm going to set the questions and the context about the discussion today, and then they are going to give a presentation of the work that they're doing in their respective contexts. And then following that, we're going to have a question and answer session where you can ask them some questions about their work, and we can speak more about organizing as members of the Global South. So my name is Tsokofatu Putu, by the way. I am a master's student who has studied economic development and also has a background in international relations. And I am originally from the Rethinking Economics for Africa group, but I'm also a part of the Rethinking Economics Members Council, so the overarching Members Council. So I'm very excited to be facilitating this discussion with some group or people who are in the Global South group and who I've worked alongside. So today we have, our speakers will introduce themselves, but I'm just giving a quick overview of who they are. We have Sian, who's from the Uploaders in Nigeria. We have Neo Mosala, who is from Rethinking Economics for Africa in South Africa. We have Karan, who is from Rethinking Economics India. And then we have Ignacio, who is representing the South American region, who has done work there as well. So they'll introduce themselves and their organizations more in detail. But yeah, I've just given an overview. So thank you so much for joining us, speakers. Just to start off, before your presentation, I'd like to give some overarching questions that we're going to be looking and thinking about in the session. The first of which is, what in your local context motivated the start of a Rethinking Economics group? And what makes you passionate about rethinking economics? And also from your national perspective, how can we push towards pluralism and diversification and decolonization in economics? And also from your experience, what can your group's experience bring to this larger rethinking economics movement? And what lessons can we leverage from you and your group? So those are the overarching questions that are going to be guiding this discussion. And later on, there'll be an opportunity for anyone who is watching to ask the panelists questions. So I'm not sure who wants to start first. Maybe the order should be Sian, Neo, Karan, and Ignacio. If that works, can we have Sian start for us?
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. So the first question. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Shion, DMO, a graduate of economics, Unilag, and I, with some guys, founded Rethinking Economics India programs here in Nigeria, based in the University of Lagos. What actually prompted the start was a lot of activities, a lot of events in the economy, the Nigerian economy. Um, I was actually bothered with some three things that affected the Nigerian economy. The first was the poverty rate. The poverty rate in the country was alarming as at then, and uh, the ease of doing business. How easy it is for young people to start business, to begin, to join the economy, and then the life expectancy, so that's uh, health aspect of it, and because of those three things, I felt there's something wrong somewhere as regarding how the study of economics really applies in the Nigerian economy. Because when I got into the university, I was so concerned to learn about how these major economic issues could be resolved, but I couldn't get solid answers, practicable answers from the curriculum, from and even among the rest of my mates in other universities. So, and we decided to just be sure maybe we are missing something. So we did some research around 7 universities in the country. Yeah, we were asking young undergraduate students, especially those close to their final year, uh, how they find the economics curriculum and what they think about it. And from the research, we figure out that there's a lot of things wrong in the curriculum that needs to be fixed. Because many of the responses we got said that they can't find they can't find really practicable lessons, that is working solutions from the study of economics. And we felt we needed to change that. So, and then we discovered Rethinking Economics International, found that they have common goals, got affiliated, and that's how we started the journey uh, of Rethinking Economics, the upholders, based in University of Lagos. Uh, and then, shall I move on to the second question?
Yes, please. Can you
Uh,
continue? So
um,
you have about 10 to 15 minutes. So
okay.
please carry on.
And from the national perspective, uh, how can we push for pluralism, diversification, and decolonization of economics curriculum? Well, so far so good. We actually found three objectives to work as regarding that, and the first is we try to expand our network. We try to expand our network, and the reason is because the demographics of the country, Nigeria, we have so many young people in the country, and many of the populations they are between the ages 15 to 45, and so we felt that if we can grow our network, expand our reach, there will probably come a time where the network will actually be the ones to activate the change that they would like to see in the economy, Nigerian economy. So, and so we've always tried to keep that into our goals, as to always try to expand, especially to reach out to student networks in other universities that are far away from our vicinity. And then The second one that we did was we try to organize events and programs to equip the economic students, to give them tools and knowledge about our findings, about things in the Nigerian economy or in the curriculum particularly that needs to be deleted or added. And we try to organize even programs to empower the students in skills development, to develop their skills. Uh, we, because we figure out that the besides from the poverty levels, the high unemployment rate in the country actually is one of the biggest economic problems that is really frustrating many of the young economic students. And though there are challenges, of course, but to survive, we always try to create something interesting for young economics too. And then from there, we try to introduce them to the mission, which is to really create this economic environment that will make everyone better off. And because the situations in the country is not really good right now regarding the economy, and there are lots of young people who are actually frustrated about it. So to kind of bring them and equip them is another goal that we another objective that we try to pursue to achieve that. And the third one that we do is to um, engage with the academians. Okay, so we have in our networks professors of economics, lecturers of economics that we communicate with, and we also include them in our programs. And to the public also, we also try to make it engaging to the public, because we feel the economy is not just the property of the economics, and that everyone in the economy, which includes even those who did not study economics or even those who didn't go to school, are actually or should actually play a part or contribute to the discussions, especially policy discussions. So um, through those objectives, we try to achieve that. And from experience of our local group, what the Rethinking Economics International can learn, okay, from us, well, regarding our challenges, I think, I don't know, for Rethinking Economics International, they are doing a great work in trying to support all the local groups around the world, and sometimes we feel we try to consider how it could be for the team to balance out the needs of all the local groups, and because the economic environment in each country where those local groups are different, and definitely you expect that to be a major factor as regarding uh, how active the local group are. So I think that one is something that they are really trying to balance off all the local groups to make sure that where more support is needed is given and where not. And also regarding our operations, regarding our organization, due to the situation in the country, we experience challenges even sometimes when we reach out to some of the academians, because the journey to decolonizing and even including pluralism in the curriculum is kind of a tough one, because you have academians who are resistant to change sometimes, and where we kind of reach out to them, economics also supports, and to kind of improve on that would actually really help.
Awesome.
That's it.
Cool. Thank you so much. We're going to speak more about the work that you're doing, but thank you for those insights and the overview. I think that it was a really good start. And yeah, we'll see if anyone has any questions after the other presentations. So thanks so much. I've asked Ignacio to come on next. So can you please come forward, Ignacio?
Hi. Can you, okay, I think now it's ready. Can you hear me and see me? I had in the beginning a few problems with my speakers, but now I think everything is going good. So, hi, I am Ignacio. I am from Chile, and I am economist from the University of Chile in Santiago de Chile. So I'm here on behalf of the America Soy, which is a Latin American network of organizations. And also I'm here on behalf of OPES, the Observatory of Economics Chile, which is an organization based in Chile. So I'm trying to figure out the three questions and my presentation, trying to connect both organizations, both goals, which of course are closely related. So first of all, I studied, of course, as I mentioned before, I studied economics in the University of Chile, which is a very orthodox place. And this is something, it's not something new for anyone here probably, because we know that the economic students, the economic teaching is very orthodox in most of the, at least Occidental countries. And specifically in Chile, when we were studying, we, with another student, we were very worried about the way we were learning and the way we were understanding the Chilean economy, and especially this idea of the success of the Chilean economy, because this is a concept very common used in the public debate. Even for other countries in Latin America, Chile has been seen as a very successful experience in the economic performance in the last decade. So something important about this issue is we felt how the economic debate, it was and it is, like, at least until a few years ago, very narrow. The perspective to talk about economics, it was very concentrated about the general mainstream paradigm. And why is that? Mainly because, as maybe some of you know, the Chilean economy and Chile was used as quite of experiment of the neoliberalism policies in the 70s during the dictatorship of Pinochet between the 73 and the 1991. So during this time, it was implemented this for maybe one of the first countries where it was implemented this kind of policies, even before than England with Margaret Thatcher and in the US with Ronald Reagan. So this kind of experiment, it was something very strong for the Chilean society and for the economic development for the following years. So public policy in general has reproduced this narrow framework. And even the world has moved to another direction in terms of the role of the state or the role of social programs. The Chilean economy have the particularity that even like other countries in the region, as Bolivia or Argentina, which experienced some other direction in the kind of policy that they wanted to implement, the Chilean was a very fixed policy in this neoliberalism paradigm. For a very common and hard example is the water. Like this idea of the public water and free water that you can find in the river. In Chile, all the water is privatized. So if you are a local owner or you live in the countryside and you are a local agriculture, you don't have necessarily the right to use the water for your own agriculture for your private use, because the water is privatized. So this is a very important issue, especially in some part of the country where I don't know if maybe you have heard about the avocados in Chile, which they are so very intensive in water consuming, that kind of production. So all the people that living around the agriculture of avocados, they don't have the possibility to use enough water even for personal use. So we have like this kind of issue. So we didn't believe that the Chilean experience, it was a really success experience. And we look outside to see what other countries were doing, but we didn't learn about that. We didn't learn about other experience. We didn't learn about other school of thoughts. So we only see that that the idea of the Chilean success, and also we learn these very specific tools, very focused on mathematical and methodological issues to understand economics. So a reproduction of this very narrow perspective, we can see this reproduction in the public debate. Like you can see in all the newspapers or the more specific, more specifics medias in economics, you have all the reproduction of the same people and the same ideas nurturing and feeding this public debate. So this is what people learn about economics, is what they teach in the universities and what they use in the public debates, in the medias, and so on. So we need, and we feel like coming back to this idea of where we were when we were studying, the students, we felt that we need to organize in order to improve with other tools the public debate. That's why when we were finishing the degree in economics, we organized and we found this Observatory of Economic Policy. What was important, and this is still important now, is to democratize the debate and put into the debate with new tools. So, for instance, we started to do some policy papers, working papers, to try to talk about different reforms, different laws that we can implement in Chile, and of course, it's possible. One example of that, it was the reduction of the working hours, because Chile has the 45 hours per week by law. That maybe is not that much, but of course, in the reality, it happened that the people work more than that. And if we can see in the OECD countries, Chile is the second country which people work more per year, more hours per year. So this is something possible, but it is very difficult to introduce that kind of idea with all the common sense going around these very orthodox policies. So other thing that we thought that it was important is to show to general people, to not only for economists, that of course there are mostly men in this space of power in doing economics. So we are wanted to doing something more open to society. So we developed a book called the 38 Figures That Define Chile. So you can find in this book, which is online. So of course I invite you, all of you, to visit our website. You can find the book there. Of course, yes. So you can see there in these 38 figures, well, how we can interpret it in another way, this idea of the success of the Chilean economy. Besides this, also we have a podcast where we have a space, more informal space, where we invite some guest economists, and we talk about how has been the pandemic into the Chilean economy, the pension system, natural resource, feminist economics, among others. So this is a general idea of what we have done in Chile. But what at that point, that what is going on with the Chilean perspective? Because something important for us, it was also learn from our experience. Sorry, I don't know if I'm going well with the time.
Yeah, can you start just wrapping up, please?
Okay, no problem. So to talk about a little bit about the America Soy, which is another important part of, of this idea of economic movement. The America Soy, it was a network of Latin American organizations which are organized particularly with the goal of change the way how the universities are teaching economics. So this was very interesting for us, and we joined as the Observatory of Economic Policy to the America Soy. And we started to work with them, which has been like very interesting for us. And we start maybe to mention a few projects that we have that maybe make sense with the goals. One of them is a book which we are trying to connect the university teaching and the public policy, because we know that both these topics are very related between them, and one of them depends on the other one. So we are making a review about how the economic teaching has been implemented with a historical context about how the public policy has affected the teaching economics, and on the other way around too. Beside this, we know that we have to democratize the economics, we have to change the way we are learning economics, and we have to change especially one very important thing is to go into the younger students, which are learning in the first beginning years in the bachelor, where they are generating the common sense in economics, the basics idea that they are going to reproduce when they work in different areas. So we need to change that. We need to include a more pluralistic perspective. And one thing that we are going to do in this at the end of this month is the first Latin American School of Heterodox Economics. So we invite all Latin American students to join the school, which is a space which is free. We're going to learn about structuralism and post-development. Okay, sorry, maybe I took so long, but great. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
Cool, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing about all of your work. I think some more questions about it will come up in the Q&A. So I think that if you run out of time there will be some opportunity to speak more about it. And then can we get Neo afterwards? And actually just one thing that I wanted to say from your presentation is that the issues of water privatization are also big across the African continent as well. So I think that was a good flag, and just wondering for later our Q&A that we do have all of these common issues, and this is why we have this Global South Coalition. We do have these common issues, and how can we work together more, and so that we're not all doing different work. So we're speaking in unison against this like orthodoxy. So yeah, I think that was an important and interesting point to have picked up. Next, we're going to have Neo, who is from Rethinking Economics for Africa, that is based in South Africa.
Hi, Tejo, and hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. So I am from Rethinking Economics for Africa VITS, but I think I'm representing the entirety of Rethinking Economics for Africa, and we are a student organization based in South Africa. We sort of were born out of the fees must fall movement in South Africa, particularly around the issues of the curriculum, and the curriculum was being widely challenged at the time, so it wasn't something that was specific to the economics discipline, but it was something across the board where the coloniality and the power dynamics in the education system in South Africa were being questioned alongside the financial demands of the students. So students weren't just thinking about the fact that we were demanding free education, we were also demanding quality education and education. And following that, specific to economics, there was a push by economics students to really take a look at our curriculum and question the discipline and exactly what we were learning, especially because so many of the questions that come up within the tensions and the conflicts in South Africa are fundamentally economic. And then as students, you're told that despite the fact that you've been studying this discipline for a year, 2 years, 3 years, you don't have the requisite understanding of the economy and exactly what the dynamics are. And then we push back against the power and we're like, okay, well, why don't we? Perhaps if students can't find a model, right? We can't, through our own reasoning, find a model for how free education would be feasible, or at least from your perspective, that can't happen. Perhaps there's a fundamental problem with the curriculum. And then in terms of power dynamics, we found that students, women, Black people, because of how South African institutions, the majority of the previously white institutions are set up, the power dynamics are still very inequitable. So the people who are taken seriously are people who have the most power. And as a student, as Black people, as women, we sort of are voices that aren't taken seriously, and our economic demands aren't taken seriously. So there was a challenge to the curriculum, and Rethinking Economics was sort of born out of that. So in 2015, the Fees Must Fall movement began, and I would say that Rethinking Economics was born in 2016 when, well, the end of 2015 to 2016, when students realized we have to organize ourselves. And then we also had we were fortunate enough to partner very early on with NGOs and academics who were also really passionate about pluralism and decolonized economics, because these were long-standing issues that individual organizations and individual people within institutions were trying to bring up repeatedly, but there wasn't really a sort of like organized movement among students. So that's how I think I like people to conceptualize Rethinking Economics for Africa, not as like a centralized organization, but sort of a movement. And the most, I think, efficient way of organizing ourselves was through student chapters at various South African universities. So you had Rethinking Economics for Africa WITS, we had Rethinking Economics for Africa UCT at the University of Johannesburg as well, and we had numerous other chapters at the University of Limpopo and Rhodes and various other universities where perhaps the chapters were smaller because the institutions are smaller, but also there is that sort of like power dynamic in South Africa where previously white institutions do have the most power in terms of like organizing and access to funding for students. So the other thing that we've really tried to address as students at WITS and UCT is to connect with other universities and other chapters, because we realize that students from all around the country are facing the same problems we are, and even different problems. And we try to sort of like network with them and have them enter our network of partners. The Institute of Economic Justice has been really supportive and really helpful in helping the student chapters organize, but also through they organizing with the chapters themselves and the connections that really were fundamental in making sure that we as students had enough resources and we were able to take our momentum and these sort of like ideas that we had and build them into something impactful. So the first Rethinking Economics for Africa festival was in 2018, and it was hosted at the University of the Witwatersrand, and we sort of were able to have students from all over South Africa meet in one place, students and academics, and be able to discuss not just our frustrations, but also very tangible ideas that we had around what we think curriculum reform should look like. So before that, even in 2017, as an outcome of Fees Must Fall itself, there had been the introduction of the core curriculum, and people from Rethinking Economics were student representatives at the discussions with the university, at my university at WITS, and the university and academics and students sort of coming together and being like, okay, the introduction of the core curriculum is the first step in the plurality and decolonization agenda. And it's very important to emphasize that it was the first step, and we are still pushing for more curriculum reform, because the core curriculum still is something that was quite progressive given the neoliberal economics we were studying before, but it was still an import that came from Europe and American universities having tried this core curriculum first. So our work has been around organizing students and building legitimacy, because we realize that we can't just be an organization of 4 or 5 students saying we want curriculum reform. So we had to do the groundwork of making sure we had membership at the various universities. We had public campaigns and public events where students from various disciplines and economics were able to say these are the problems we identify, because we realize that as student movements, there can sort of be blind spots when it's very centralized and you don't make it a democratic process of hearing out what students really have a problem with. And something that stands out for me, as I think this was the 2019 Rethinking Economics Festival, where a few students from the University of Limpopo said, well, and this was something that had previously not really been in our mandate, and it was a blind spot for us. But at the student and academic convening, they brought up the fact that as economics students, as particularly at like universities that are quite underfunded in South Africa, it's really hard to find out what you're going to use this degree from. And as we know, there are very tangible issues that link to our concerns as students. The fact that certain disciplines in South Africa aren't really that well funded. So it's very hard for students under the education model that we have that isn't completely free to be able to study disciplines like economics when they come from previously or they come from impoverished backgrounds, and maybe they can't afford to be self-funded, and there isn't a lot of institutional funding for people to study economics. A lot of the institutional funding in South Africa has been towards disciplines that are seen as more scientific. And we see that even our Minister of Education in South Africa has sort of said on various occasions that students are studying disciplines that are sort of nonsense disciplines, and there's a lack of respect for humanities and what those disciplines can give to the South African context, which is quite unfortunate, because so many of our South African problems are not going to be solved by sort of like the neoliberal economics alone. And it's evident because our challenge to the government and universities and sort of like the traditional economic discipline and the neoclassical discipline is always, if what you guys teach and what you believe and the models we use are so great, why is the country in the state that it is? Perhaps we need to sort of question what we have been doing in terms of policy, in terms of the way our labor markets are set up, in terms of the way what we direct our research towards, what disciplines are seen as important in influencing policy in South Africa, because so many of our issues in South Africa are fundamentally economic, but also sociological. A lot of them are historical, and without taking into consideration the racialization of capitalism in South Africa and how poverty is racialized here and how poverty is very gendered, you can't really say you have the type of economic transformation or the institutional transformation for that matter, that is always being spoken about when you have this massive blind spot where you aren't taking into consideration that the policies need to address the racial disparity in South Africa. They need to address the way our labor market is fundamentally set up to be very exploitative, because that's what being in a post-colony is. And with us, we are this post-colony, which also after I don't think we can really call it decolonization. I think when the British sort of like left, it was then after that the Union, and then right after that it was apartheid, and a very racialized hierarchy in the economy was set up. So when you teach economics, it's a massive blind spot that we aren't taught about that. And previously, it was through the efforts of Rethinking Economics and students at my university, where third-year students can now study South African developmental issues, which is really appalling, because so many of our economic issues are around the issue of development. They're around the issue of the historical economics of South Africa, and why we have issues like the high unemployment rate and the youth unemployment, and how poverty is so gendered, and the fact that so many people can't get access to education or employment or the skills that are always being spoken about. It's something that's very historical. And the fact that we only introduced the South African developmental studies at undergraduate level so late throughout the history of the institution really shows how it was through students pushing and saying, as students, these are the needs that we not only see for the broader economy, but also for us just as people that are going to be the academics, we're going to be the policymakers, we're going to be the people that go out there and shape the world. And we don't think that what we are learning is adequate. And we also don't think that we can just limit what we do as students to simply the curriculum. So we've done things outside of that, like the Rethinking Economics for Africa Festival, like having our own on-campus engagements and inviting speakers with very diverse schools of thoughts, people that have done the research and have done the work in order to participate in the discussions around land reform, around minimum wage, very topical issues that everyone is invested in, that we didn't think were even being discussed within the academy. And we thought it was really important for us as students to organize ourselves and push for curriculum reform, public education, and making economics more accessible on campus and outside of the campus.
Great, thank you so much, Neo. A lot there. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that the questions that I may have for you, I will just keep for the larger discussion afterwards. But yeah, thank you for sharing about your work, and just the frustration, which I think is a common thread throughout all of the presentations that we've had right now, that the organizing came from existing frustrations. But I also have a lot more questions to ask about that as well. Can we go on to our last speaker, and then we will open up for questions and answers. So Karan, can you come on? Karan is from Rethinking Economics India.
Hello, can you hear me? And Ross, I think you're going to need to put up the slides. But so I founded Rethinking Economics India last year, and now I lead on strategy operations for the network. And I think I missed a memo because I really haven't prepared for these questions, but I will cover briefly the network as a whole, and then we can pick up some of those bits later. So we are a national network, and we've adopted many of the ideas of what we think a national network could and should be doing. And on the next slide, really the idea being still to build a better economics for a better world, but an economics that is fit for purpose for our problems. And we started last June, spurred on really from the conversations that were happening around the onset of the pandemic. And on the right of the slide, you can sort of see some brief highlights from the time that we've had. And we built this entirely first. So I've never met in person most of the people I work with most closely today. And a consequence of this is also that our leadership is made up less of economics students as it is working professionals, and therefore is a more, I would say, student-inspired movement than students ourselves. So on the next slide, in terms of how we're structured to make this happen, so we have core teams and independent projects. I'm not really going to go into too deeply into this, but the activities keep running, and then specific interventions that we've had for a certain aim or goal. And that's sort of what this really looks like. And on the next slide, you'll just see a quick snapshot on the projects we've done or are working on, and I'll be going into a few of these more closely in the rest of my presentation. So broadly, our day-to-day activities can come into sort of a few buckets. The first are these public-facing events that we host. Some of these are discussions, like our reading circle, workshops or specific groups, and most of the time they're centered around thematic areas, because that's sort of easier for us to then pull in people who are not economists, but easier for us to pull in people in the public to sort of start building pluralist ideas around these thematic areas. And then we can engage these communities sort of build and think on their own about these problems. So the next slide is also that we should be able to pull together different stakeholders, because I think, like the previous speaker said, all of these partners and allies that we find are key people for us to be working with to help expand the reach of the movement. And we work very closely with mentors and professors who can give us a better idea of what to do next, really. And we work a lot with other youth-led gangs to see how we can really develop new programming and projects in what we want to do. And we really see the role here being that we can convene new players and work together with multiple people to start new ideas. And the next slide, I think something to highlight is that we also do a lot of content work, whether on Instagram or through writing. There's always a need to make some of these ideas more accessible to a broader audience. And in talking about that, I think what's also been really important for us over the last year is how we can mobilize new people. And on sorry, Ross, for all the interruptions, but yeah, the next slide. We spent a lot of time trying to build engagement through these workshops, ambassador programs, and events to try and incubate new local chapters at universities, because we're really far away from the action, and they would probably, students at universities themselves would probably know a lot better where they should be campaigning. And that's really the growth team, and a lot of the capacity building work that we do by providing toolkits and convening these existing chapters are a part of what we do at the network. And I'm going to use the rest of my time to quickly highlight some of our key projects that might be more relevant for today's discussion. So one of the first projects that I'd like to talk about is the curriculum review. And a desire for something like this came up very, very early in the organization. It did involve and came up and was developed with a lot of mentor interviews and other stakeholders that we met. But what we're doing with this is really trying to develop our own understanding of where we are in terms of curriculum, in terms of pluralism curriculum and those ideas, and mapping out where universities are at, so that we can then create a basis for other people to organize or for local curriculum and have a much clearer understanding of what we're trying to change. And I think that the key outputs for this are really going to be a report and a survey. Hopefully, we'll be releasing that in the larger event in September to understand how people feel about the engagement in the curriculum as they are. And the next project I'd like to highlight is our diversity project. It's one of our key collaborations with 3 other organizations: Mahujan Economists, Mang Prayogshala, an academic partner, and Women in Econ Policy, another nonprofit. We are currently looking to release a report to shed light on the state of minority representation in India, especially in academic circles, and to really understand more deeply what attitudes and biases that prevent these minority groups from sort of reaching their full potential in the academic space. We've done a previous version of this report with just 2 out of the 3 partners, with a much women and the SC, ST, and OBC categories in India. So we're looking to take some of that work further, and I think Jaya has dropped the link to the report in the chat. And last but not least, the one project I think is very relevant to today's discussion is the Rethinking Economics for the Global South. And happy to have both Sean and Ignacio on this call as well, both people who have contributed a lot to our initial ideating. And we sort of acted as a host institution for the coming together of this platform. And the Global South project on the next slide looks to foster a space for joint decision-making, agenda setting, and collaboration for other groups in the Global South. And I think it's really come as a result of being all very comfortable with going virtual, but also because we felt there was a lack of cross-country organizing among networks in the and I think the goal going forward is also to sort of contextualize some of these shared experiences, make the movement more relevant to our concerns and problems. The members of this collective at the moment are Rethinking Economics, the India Network, RE Pakistan, very early group, the America Soy, and the uploaders, as well as REFA at WITS. And we are, on the next slide, looking for more partners to join us on the back of our last event. We'd be excited to get in touch with other groups and networks in the Global South who'd like to work together. So before I end, I think 2 slides from here, some shameless promotion. We will be hosting our own flagship event at the end of September. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. And I hope to sort of take up some of your questions as we go along. That's about it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Karan, for that. A lot of work being done there, and a lot also that I think that I've picked out. And I think it was actually a great presentation to lead us into the question and answer session that we're about to have. And one thing that I want to comment on is actually the Global South Coalition that has recently been worked on, and you have just said, Karan, that it's because of this, because of COVID, and that we can work more virtually, and it's brought us all online, that we can make these connects better. And one question that I think to start us off with before I ask the question and answer that are in the question and answer channel there, is, so the challenges that we've had aren't necessarily new. Neoliberalism has been something that African leaders and leaders across the Global South, and I think people in the Global South have complained about for years. And even before that, with the Bandung conference, where this Global South coalition post-independence even started, our grievances have been very similar since then. So how can we make this coalition and the work that it's doing more tangible, right? I think it's been 60 years plus of us organizing together as the Global South. How do we look to innovate to make it more impactful? And where do people, what are some projections that people see, and how can we ourselves take it further in it? And the urgency, I guess, become more visible. I hope this makes sense. But just if anyone has, can answer that, and then we can, or if anyone has any thoughts, maybe 1 or 2 people, or the people who are working on the Global South project specifically. So Rain, so Ignacio, Karan, and Sean, if you guys have any inputs on that, and then we can go into the Q&A. And if you need more clarity, please just ask. So Karan, can you start? Because you had just had the presentation.
Yeah, sure. I thought maybe. But yeah, I think, I mean, you mentioned a lot of what we've been thinking, right? That one, these problems have existed for a while. They're not new problems. They're not changed problems. They're very the same as they were. But I think one very simple, I would say maybe area in which has made organizing a little more difficult would be I think something that's very reflected in like the at the micro level within our national networks and within local groups, right? It's that organizing is a logistical nightmare. Not so much from the perspective of actually setting up a call or doing that kind of work, but in order to align different people's expectations and motivations of how that should work really requires a lot of initiative from a central actor. In terms of reducing sort of the information asymmetry in terms of what happens next, how do we work together, what do we want to do, what are the goals, and framing that in a way that is democratic so that every partner and every member of the group can co-develop it and co-lead it is really something that takes time and is something that requires a lot of initial sort of energy and manpower. So the I mean, at a very basic level, the project management of it all is something that really requires a lot more to emerge than we typically would expect of a grassroots movement, because we sort of say that yes, we'll provide these at like a larger international level. We say we'll provide this knowledge, we'll provide these toolkits, and hopefully some of this would enable some of these conversations to happen. But in reality, then there's a need to be a lot more in person, a lot more driven towards making these things happen. And I think that's just very, very at the top of my head in terms of what challenges currently are and what we want to continue looking at. And maybe I'll pass it to one of the other two to continue. Ignacio, if you'd like to.
Hi. Okay, perfect. So, I have some thoughts. So, I was thinking about like what is the important thing to do something like sustainable. Of course, we can learn also from the experience, and something at least in Latin America, something that has started to change. It has to be with how the society, the entire society, get involved in those changes. So this puts something very important for this kind of organization as ours, where we have the challenge to how to make it bigger, how to do it more inclusive, how to include the underrepresented sectors, because are going to be that sectors of society that are going to make the changes. So this is something that came up to me. Yes, so this is something by now. I don't know if someone wants to add something.
Sian, do you have anything to add? Otherwise, we can move on to the next question. No, also, if you have something to add, that's cool. And then I'll outline all of the questions, maybe assign them to some speakers, and then we can answer the questions like that. Any more thoughts on this question from anyone? Okay, cool. So I'm going to move on to the questions that are in the Q&A channel, and please continue to add questions if they do come up. So a question that I'm seeing here is, how did your respective societies survive COVID-19 lockdowns? And the person says, our group has really struggled with internet access because we all went back home. And I think that this was a similar struggle to rethinking groups in South Africa, where it's structured around universities and people have access to Wi-Fi and the internet in the university space, but when they go back home to their villages or to some of the places they live in some contexts, then they aren't able to participate in rethinking work anymore. So how has that been navigated? Has it been better that it's because it's been virtual for some groups? Can we take maybe Sian and then Neo, and then Karan and then Ignacio? Oh, actually, sorry, can I just outline the rest of the questions? So can we get Neo and Sian for that question that I've just asked? And then can we get another question here is, so I think that this has been answered really by some of what Karan has said, but following the need for RE to learn from its South local groups, how can we increase cooperation between RE Global South groups? So can you take that one? And another question is, I think, very logistics based, but it's how can I be part of the network? Okay, so this can be to Neo, how can I be part of the network Rethinking Economics for, oh, sorry, I thought that was for Africa. So how can I be part of the network Rethinking Economics for the Global South? So can maybe Ignacio answer that one? And then just a question on the struggles that different chapters are facing, and can everyone at the end maybe answer that? So what have been some of the struggles and the challenges that you have faced in organizing for Rethinking Economics? But this can be after you have answered your initial question. So can you answer the first one that I've assigned to you, and then afterwards we can speak to what the struggles have been, and yeah, what the bigger role of a Global South project is for rethinking economics. So Sian, you can go ahead.
The question you asked was how the society is surviving in this pandemic, and how we struggle with internet access. I must admit that one of the biggest challenges we've had, especially during this period, is organizing events online. Besides from the fact that the internet penetration in the country is quite low, there is a growing number of people who are joining the internet economy due to this pandemic, but the rate at which that is happening is really slow, and also that applies to the students. Most of the students are internet avid, but we have usually poor network bandwidth, and that actually affects the organization of our programs or virtual events. And sometimes we try to see how we can move to the best locations just to get the best internet to produce such virtual events. And then about our invited speakers, there are many times where the speakers may not be audible or could experience one or two challenges during the program due to virtual, the internet quality actually. And it's kind of difficult, but recently we are looking at how we can manage that. And one of the ways I think we learned that from Rethinking Economics is to we now have in our group now a technical team where we kind of do some test run for about a day or two just prior the event, just to check for any technical issues or network issues, and to see that everything works fine before we begin. And then For the attendees, we also have our YouTube channel where we produce and create the output of the virtual event and upload it for them, so they can always watch whenever they are convenient. And we make sure that we send this to all subscribers of our newsletter. And that's so far the way we've been managing it. And regarding the cost of the internet, we also try to support student networks who are registered as members. These are the way we have been coping during this pandemic.
Great. Thank you very much. Neo, can you come in, and can you also speak to how at this moment of COVID that requires a lot of discussion about economics and about whether our curriculum is addressing issues like COVID and all of the other issues that it has made so prominent, just the connectivity and how organizing in RIFA has been during the time, if you can. Off. Neo, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. I think I would second a lot of the things that Cian has said about how connectivity and cost are such a problem. I think in South Africa, cost is the major problem, because even for those who may not live in more rural areas where connectivity is a problem, data costs are really, it's alarming how much it costs to access the internet. And that's a very big barrier for information. And unfortunately, like Tsogo said, most people access connectivity when they are on campus. And then the moment you leave and you go back home, you're expected to study virtually and then also be able to have connectivity. So in South Africa, I think with us and our own chapter, we really had to diversify the output that we're having. So instead of just trying to have an online Zoom version of every single event or every single thing we're doing, we had to get creative about how we are going to output some of our student-made curriculum things, for example. So for our public education, we had to create a handbook where instead of having to listen to an entire presentation or a video, people can download a handbook in the form of a PDF and read that, and it isn't so data intensive. In terms of our chapters and sort of sustaining that community, things like WhatsApp, which are more on the affordable end data-wise, became critical for us, having discussions via text, via WhatsApp. We had a Discord for our learning groups at some point because it's so low cost on data. We really had to go onto platforms like that instead of making everything a video conferencing situation, which we knew wasn't accessible for the majority of people. And you find that when you bring the discussions, when you bring the education and the resources to platforms that are more accessible, people really genuinely engage with it. So making the platforms inherently accessible was a big one. But the other thing for our festival and our bigger events where we really needed people to attend video conferences like this, we were able to fortunately have a really good crowdfunder, which was really supported by the International RE Network, where we had this crowdfunder for our attendees to be able to have their data costs subsidized by us as the event organizers. And that led to a really great turnout for the event in terms of students, because we were really worried that we were going to end up having a student event where the majority of attendees were just, academics and people from the NGO sector and labor who could afford to access the platform. So being able to raise money and leverage our connections as an organization that's pre-existing and asking our membership, hey, when you sign up to come to this event, do you have your data covered? Are you in an area where you need us to either help you with connectivity. For example, there was a point where campuses were open, so students, even though we weren't attending on campus, students could come to campus and connect here, and there were a few people doing that. But for people that were at home, we were like, if you need your data cost subsidized, we'll be able to do that. And I think a really big part of inclusion and economic justice is taking into account when people don't have adequate resources, and if we don't do it internally within our chapters and our organizations, we can't claim to be fighting for broader economics accessibility, digital accessibility, and economic access if we can't do it within our small groups that we're organizing in.
Great, thank you for that answer. Karan, can you come in with the answer to the question that I posed to you earlier?
Yeah, so I think the question really was on how we can engage networks in the global south. So in terms of really some of the things that have been said, and what I kind of answered a little bit before was that I think there are a couple of parts to making sure this collaboration happens and is sustainable, right? The first is really, I think, the role of community, because obviously we've all worked in our respective countries. We've never met. We sort of keep we know about each other's activities through these meetings, and like the Slack channels that sort of update everybody. But other than that, there's very little actual interaction between teams. And therefore, the community aspect of making sure that you know what's happening with other networks, and you're able to do a bit of that networking is important. So I think our first Rethinking Economics for the Global South, that is in the project meeting, I think I spent about 80% of our first meeting that we just did like a speed dating and really getting to know what the other people were like, and very very close to that is that you have to be able to be in a place to start those discussions and to start them right? Because none of this collaboration is going to happen if you don't get people in a room and sort of get the ball rolling, right? But also, I mean, it's important to get the right people in the room so that the people so that on the call there are people who are able to speak for their own organizations, they're able to make decisions for those organizations, and are then able to mobilize people, infrastructure, potentially money towards a collaborative goal, right? Because if you don't have that, then it's very hard to work with multiple networks and collaborate in that fashion. And I also talked a bit about the logistics end of enabling these collaborations, but an extension to that is really how do you decide upon an idea to work on together, and how soon do you decide? Because there's a bit of a trade-off between putting together the structure of what you want this project to look like too early, because then people don't feel like they have enough buy-in. But at the same time, if you workshop for too long, or if you have multiple meetings over months sort of discussing as to what should we be doing and what the ideas behind it are, then the momentum starts to die down, and it kind of ends too early. And related to that as well, I think the idea of momentum being something that you continue both in your regular cadence of sort of meeting each other and making sure something is happening, but also that activities you plan should, even if they're small, they should be something that can start and get people excited about it, because otherwise it's very hard to sort of get other people to feel the collective vision you're trying to build. But yeah, I think that's about it for me in this.
Great, thank you so much. So Ignacio, I sent Ignacio a question, but I think it would be great to go on from what Karan was just speaking to, and if you don't really want to answer that, that's okay. We can move on to another question. But I want to ask a question on organizing in the Global South, and also not just as an economics group, because we're trying to. We know that as has been said by different speakers, this work has been done across the Global South for many, many years. And I think rethinking economics and looking at it from an economics perspective amongst us is relatively, this organization is new, but I think other organizations have done the work. So how do we just across the movement, how do we integrate and use the work that other people have done before us, and how do we make sure that we're not replicating work that already exists? And I think you kind of spoke on it when you spoke about the water project, right? And I commented that we have a similar issue in Africa, in like sub-Saharan Africa. How do we have those channels that are bigger than just like us looking at this niche economic aspect, and just bringing different movements together? Is that a quite a big question? But I hope that you can pull out the thread. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question. So I think from my perspective, and from our organization, of course, it's really important to start to have connection with Global South, and on the idea that all the development in our regions had been following what the core, and the core is mainly the rich country, have done before. So we were constantly follow that policy and that path of development. And even globalization, or the big idea of globalization, it has been intensively between rich countries and the relation with the periphery and with the Global South, but not necessarily between Global South. So we have a very big issue there in the way that how we can learn between each other, how we can learn about other paths of development that don't follow the same ideas that we have reproduced, like considering that all the policies that we have experienced in our country. Of course, I can talk more about the South American experience, of course, but it has been something that has been bring from the rich country in that moment. Policies that usually had failed to reduce inequality, to represent the whole society. So the situation that we have is that we have a lot of big sectors with underrepresentation in the society, with a high level of inequality, not only in income inequality, but so also in the way we are living, or we are living our lives. So in this idea of how we have now, at least in this kind of level of student organization, we have the possibility to connect between each others, and try to learn from each other, and collect news ideas that maybe we haven't received before in these more formal channels. So maybe this one could be my answer.
Cool. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. The question just had so many dynamics as well, and I think you answered it really well. So thank you for that. Yeah, and I think just what I've also gathered as I was listening to everyone is, I think we also need to be learning outside of our own realities and our own contexts. We need to be learning about how other developing countries are navigating, as you said, Ignacio, globalization and the issues with that. Because I think another aspect of neoliberalism, outside of just us learning about the orthodox, is that we're cut off from learning about the challenges of other countries. So I think that would be something that would be interesting for us to talk about as well in our chapters, that we're being separated from each other. And that's why we're duplicating work that we don't need to be duplicating, because other places have experienced the challenge and have thought about addressing it already. So that's a thought that I have gathered from what I've heard of our panelists. I would just like to speak to what the struggles each chapter is facing, and if you can give like a 3-minute answer for that, because you can see there's some more questions in the Q&A. So what are your respective struggles, and in keeping the momentum, I guess, and expanding, and yeah, what can we learn from them, I guess, and also what are some major successes that we can share amongst each other as a meeting of Global South people here right now. Yeah, and that the Rethinking Economics Network at large can take into account in its thinking itself. Can we start with Neo, and then have Karan, Cian, and then have Ignacio? But can it be brief?
Yeah, Tseho, I think a lot of our challenges have been covered in terms of the transition to digital, but also just how hard it is to maintain community when the context for that community gets removed. So as students, we're organizing around campuses, around campus life, and that camaraderie, us being able to see each other and interact with each other, was significantly decreased by the pandemic, and that harms organizing capacity. It really takes away your ability to recruit new members, to retain membership, to make sure that people sort of have this project, which is fundamentally sort of an extracurricular. It's not something that they're on campus to do, that it stays top of mind. So staying at the top of people's minds, having our events be something that's enjoyable for people to attend, something that really still gets the creative juices and all of the ideas flowing, rather than just, you know, people being talked at, which is so common with the Zoom era, that lack of interaction and just feeling like everything is a presentation, everything is a lecture. That has been a really big challenge. And I think a win that we sort of got was when we changed the format of the festival. I think having more of a dialogue style and having these smaller groups where everyone could speak. I think in all of the sessions I attended in last year's Reefer Festival, every single person in the seminar got to speak, got to ask a question, were able to interact with the speakers. And I think that was a really big win, because coming out of that, we also had really concrete things to work with, because we were in touch with the ground and what was happening, what concerns people had in terms of COVID and online learning, and how the transformation of economics was taking place online, or if we were regressing. Because I think it's very common that when there's a crisis, institutions will sort of like regress and double down on having things sort of regress, because it's a time of crisis and people aren't necessarily that critical of institutions when we're all just trying to adapt to online learning. So having like a lot of students attend the festival was a really big win, because we're able to like tap into what new problems were, what existing problems were, whether we had regressed. And coming out of that, we were also able to adapt ourselves as like a national network based on weaknesses, because we saw that certain chapters had fallen through the cracks because of accessibility. And now this year there's been work done to sort of like regain that national momentum and even a continental momentum, instead of us being this sort of like really tiny group of students in Johannesburg. We were trying to strengthen those lateral networks as well, because I think it's really hard to ask about like a Global South project when you haven't even connected with your SADC neighbors, you haven't connected with your neighbors on the continent, and you haven't done that sort of like grassroots work to connect with people who are doing the same work as you. Like Tejo has been saying, instead of trying to, you know, rebuild the wheel from scratch, I think doing that work of coming out of our shells and really trying to contact people and fundamentally making sure the community was maintained is one win, but also a really big challenge coming out of COVID and still having, online learning be the mode of learning that we have as higher education students.
Great, thank you for that, Neo. Can we please get Karan? Can you also speak about just the general struggles in your movement building outside of COVID as well? But I know you have, Rain is quite young, so the COVID context might have been the bulk of Rain, but yeah, the question is generalized.
No, definitely. I think that the COVID context, in terms of having to organize virtually, is really the bulk of what our experience has been. In terms of success and also difficulties, I mean, movement building for us has been about, in a large proportion, about bringing together different players for collaboration. Because even as within our role in India and as a national network, I think we tried to look at places where we would most need to amplify work that was already being done. We looked at players that we could partner with in order to expand the reach of what they were already doing, or to build structures around existing initiatives to make them more relevant to how we could plug in, right? So in terms of finding that fit and finding that it's in itself has been a journey. I think some success stories for us on that end were, for example, the Diversity in Academia report that we launched a couple of months back, and where the team is working in a second edition. But really, I think being able to find that place and knowing that this is the sort of the space you want to continue to occupy within the national network kind of framework, I think has been a journey in itself. And in terms of challenges, in addition to what we talked about on the virtual front, I think a challenge for any network is to figure out how to mobilize and leverage volunteers to create tangible change, right? The tangible change is most closely for us curriculum change, but not only curriculum change. But within this kind of setup where we have a group of people trying to push out the agenda, trying to get people onto the platform, especially when there's no physical, tangible attachment to any university, I think being able to communicate the vision, communicate the ideas to students. And I think one of the questions in the chat as well was, you're interested in Rethinking Economics, but you are a student and you don't feel that you know that much of the subject at all. That's something the onus is on us to try and overcome that and educate in terms of how you could be involved, right? Really building structures and ways for all, for people from different disciplines, from people from different sort of stages in life, whether you're an undergrad, a graduate student, whether you've left academia and don't intend to return, those kind of things, and building pathways for those people to get involved. And I think that's been sort of the greatest challenge for us to figure out. And we're still trying to figure out. We've had some success with a couple of local chapters, but I think not having a tangible presence on the ground has been something that makes that more difficult. And I think two sort of thoughts on doing better, right? Or what we're looking forward to in the coming years is, what we really want to do is clarify some of our thinking on impact. We are an organization that wants to mobilize people and resources for a better world, and therefore we need to be able to articulate some of those goals to people outside of the discipline as well. And while the pandemic gave us sort of a bridge to people outside of academia to kind of talk about why the system is broken, we need to probably work on that a bit more. But yeah, thank you, sir.
Great. Please, can we get Ignacio next, and then Sian? And please, can you keep it brief? After this, we're gonna have closing statements because the time is up now. So just on the struggles of your work, and then yeah, we're gonna have Sian after, and then we're gonna have a round of closing.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So maybe the main struggle for the organization, of course, from the perspective of the America Soy, from the regional network, the first struggle it was like how we can connect, because we're living in different countries, and we don't have, of course, the resources or the capacity to try to organize an international organization. So this was a very big difficult, which make like paradoxically make it easier when the pandemic started, because we started to get used to be connected in this in video calls, so we can have a more constant periodically work together. But I think something that makes me feel that is very some like very important struggle that we face not only in the America Soy but also in the Observatory of Economic Policy in Chile is, beside also the lack of resources, is how to mobilize people and how to maintain the convictions, since you are going to be doing a lot of work and you probably won't see any results very soon, because of course not all the result that you or all the change that you wanted to do are not fast, and you maybe won't be the result very fast. You won't necessarily see changes in the society that you want to change. So after in OPES, after we finish the university, we have to, all of us went to different jobs. We have another activity, so it was important how to maintain the organization, since we have other activities, since since we don't see very instant result of what we were doing in OPES. So this is a very struggle of every political social organization, how to maintain the motivation, because this is I think personally is this is the most difficult thing for an organization that has the goal to change something, especially in the social perspective, when you have to be so persistent that makes very difficult to maintain the motivation. So,
great, thank you for that. Can we get Sian, please?
Yeah, it's nice. The challenges we've had and the successes. The challenges, I think, also like most of my colleagues said, getting people to actually do something, to actually work with you, to actually uh, start a project or complete a task that you know would advance the campaign of the moment. And the reason is because sometimes I just feel maybe we are living in a different world, because sometimes we try to compare it with other RE local groups to see if they're also experiencing the same problems and how they are managing it. I'm talking about really getting to motivate people, because the situation in the country actually kind of affects the way people respond to some of our activities and problems and projects, and because of that we try to look for a very innovative way of both encouraging them and getting them to work with us to start a project or to complete a project or to help us advance or share with their networks. So that's one challenge that we face kind of on a regular, even before the COVID. But we've been trying to overcome that by also trying to listen to them to know what exactly we can do to get them to help us achieve our goals. That's talking about both the academia and the student groups, and especially the committee members. And concerning our successes, our biggest successes, to me, I think the biggest successes we've been having are the testimonies. We have a WhatsApp chat for our group, and interestingly, we get student members who send messages testifying on how our programs could be the virtual events, or some of our empowerment programs has actually helped them to advance their career, and they send thanks, and we keep those testimonies precious, because we find them that at least we know that this is a sign that we are making impacts in the lives of the student members, which is really one of our goals, and that's just it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just going to allow everyone to say one last thing for about 30 seconds a person, and then I will wrap it up. So if anything that you wanted to add but didn't, please could you say it now? And can you also, well, I think everyone's details are recorded somewhere, so you don't have to speak to that. But just any last thoughts, and then we can wrap it up. Sian, you go ahead since you are on already, and then we're going to have Ignacio, Neo, and Karan.
Yeah, I find it very helpful, I must say, that the connectivity among the local groups, especially now that we have Rethinking Economics for the Global South, has really helped us to kind of scale and balance ourselves, because I've really learned a lot from other RE local groups, which some of the principles which they advise are workable and applicable here, and really actually solved one or two problems. That's something I must comment on, and I really appreciate the efforts of Ross. Ross has been a very good person as regarding linking local networks, and helping to solve some little major challenges sometimes in trying to get some projects done. And I will also say that the audience should once in a while visit us and support our work.
Great. Thank you very much. Ignacio?
Hi. Yes, I think you can hear me, but yes, and now you can see me. So, just a final thought is, first of all, thank you to everyone for participating. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for Rethinking Economics for organizing and for giving us this space. And my final thought is just to consider, we are thinking in a pluralist economics, we are thinking in this heterodox approach, and I think one of the most important things is don't repeat the mistake that it have been taken when we follow other or other path of development, mainly like classical school or all our previous history. So what we have to think for the future, if we are going to think in pluralist economics, in heterodox, for new path of development, we have to be represented geographically and consider always this international inequality of the resource that we have. Understanding this reality, looking at our own sources, on our own history, maybe we're going to produce a better result that we haven't had before. So thank you first, everyone.
Can we get Neo? Please, can everyone else mute so long, because we can hear some feedback. Neo? You're on mute.
I'd like to second what Ignacio said about how we really need to connect with not just each other as people, but also the sources of knowledge that have been produced in the global south, and the fact that we do have our own academics and institutions. So I think I would urge students, if you're in a university in the global south and you're able to access the body of knowledge at other institutions, if it's accessible in a language you understand, do so, and make sure that when you sort of like put together resources for your chapters and educational materials, you're reaching laterally to the people who are here with us in this organization, because we're all doing kind of the same work, and we shouldn't do it in silos. We should really be reaching out to each other to think about, you know, what other chapters have done successfully, what other people have learned or pitched to their universities and it's been successful. I think that's a really good step to take as the Global South Network, to ask each other and ourselves if we're reaching laterally rather than always looking at, even within heterodox economics, I think there's a tendency to look to the West for that knowledge, and it isn't always the best way to go about things, because as we know, the amount of research conducted in the West is focused on the issues faced by the West, and the body of knowledge in other African countries, South American countries, East Asian countries, in the Indian subcontinent, there's so much knowledge there for us to acquire that I think oftentimes we overlook as student organizers.
Thank you for that, Neo. Karan?
Sorry. Thanks, Soho. So yes, I think I completely agree with Neo on the idea for pluralism to also go beyond and embrace the plurality of people that we can involve in sessions, and also the knowledge that we get. I was dropping a link into the chat from the DECON database that was released recently. I think quite useful in this context. And also, yes, echoing again in Ignacio, that the problems we want to solve are very large. I'm really happy to have so many groups together with us, and so many reflections on issues that we think are so similar, and that we get to work to collaborate in a space like this. So thank you again, Rethinking Economics and Soho, for bringing this together.
Cool. Yeah, thank you everyone for all of your hard work throughout the world, for keeping people motivated during this time, and speaking on the challenges during COVID. And also I was quite impressed at adapting, what Neo was speaking about, adapting and meeting people to where they are. I thought that was really powerful. And all of the work everyone else is doing right now to build this Global South coalition and to keep it. So thank you guys for that. It was very inspiring hearing about what you're doing, and thank you for taking the time. To the people who are listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for your questions. We haven't addressed all of them, but I think that you can get in touch with some of the speakers. Their handles and all of their contact details are on their are available. So please look into that and to speak to them personally. Thank you to the tech team and everyone who's organized this discussion. I think that we have all learned a lot. So yeah, have a good evening or good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. And thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Cheers.